You're watching News at Prime. Let's bring you this now. U.S. President Donald Trump's criticism of climate change policies has received some backlash from climate experts. During his address at the United Nations General Assembly yesterday, Trump claimed that clean energy resources such as solar, wind, do not work, and they're more expensive than fossil fuel options. Well, Trump further warning that the economies, or should we say economics, of renewable energy are harming the global economy, resulting in higher energy costs. Here at home, labor unions have been slamming government's plans to shut down or should we say coal-fired power stations as part of the country's just energy transition. The union saying this will result in a jobs bloodbath. Now, for some reaction to Trump's criticism of the green energy options, let's talk now to Saftu General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi. Mr. Vavi, good evening to you. Thank you very much for making time for this important conversation. Perhaps before we start, it's worth reminding the viewers what the U.S. President had to say yesterday around these matters. Should we take a listen first and then pick it up after he has just spoken? All right, let's do that then.
The carbon footprint is a hoax made up by people with evil intentions, and they're heading down a path of total destruction. You know, the carbon footprint was a big, big thing a few years ago. I remember hearing about the carbon footprint, and then President Obama would get into Air Force One, a massive Boeing 747, and not a new one, an old one with old engines that spew everything into the atmosphere. He'd talk about the carbon footprint, we must do so. Then he'd get in and he'd fly from Washington to Hawaii to play a round of golf. And then he'd get back onto that big, beautiful plane and he'd fly back and he'd talk about, again, global warming and the carbon footprint. It's a con job.
U.S. President Donald Trump there. Very colorful language, as always, describing what he simply doesn't agree with. Before we get to grips with what is at play here, Mr. Vavi, and how this could affect jobs, do you believe that climate change is a hoax, as Trump would have us believe?
Goodness me, this president. And those chilly words that you have just spoken there reminds us of a popular saying that every nation elect leadership it deserves. And this is a tragedy unfolding, that a leading economy in the whole world will have a president who is a climate change denialist. Somebody who doesn't believe that there is a global warming. Somebody who refuses to see the unfolding catastrophe inside his own country. In the United States, for example, very recently, we have seen the catastrophes of wildfires in California, in Hawaii. We have seen the entire towns being destroyed by wildfires. We have seen unprecedented high temperatures that have killed thousands of American workers. We have seen floods in Louisiana, in New York, in Florida. We have seen entire suburbs being engulfed in water and people losing their home in their thousands. In South Africa, we have seen in KwaZulu-Natal in 2022, April, the entire 400 people dying and whose homes have not yet been rebuilt up to this moment. We have seen recently in the Eastern Cape devastating floods, killing over 100 people in Umtata. We have seen in Western Cape continued floods on one end and long drought on the other hand, destroying crops and and undermining the food security of the entire world.
Yeah.
We have seen Gauteng devastating floods in Free State in the northwest. We have seen even in our neighbors in Mozambique, millions of people being displaced by a beating after a beating of all manner of catastrophic Ida this time, Kenneth that time. These things are real.
Yeah.
And that's why we are so outraged by what Donald Trump was saying. And I mean, for him to go to the United Nations with that type of a nonsensical theory is absolutely a devastation. And it is going to set us back because all it does is strengthen the hands of denialists. Look, there are denialists here in South Africa. There's a very strong coal lobby here in South Africa that seeks to deny that there is a devastation unfolding, as I've just made an example.
Yeah.
He is acting on behalf of the oligarchs. He is acting on behalf of the people who are funding his campaign. Just like here in South Africa, the people who are benefiting from the coal are the ones who are spewing this nonsense that there is no climate change and that we must just ignore the global warming.
All right.
And continue with business as usual.
Well, as we speak, by the way, Mr. Vavi, right now in China, there is Typhoon Ragasa, which is wreaking havoc. So just an example of the climate issues that are ongoing in the world. So we've established now that indeed you are not a climate change denialist, but your sector or the workers which you advocate on behalf of, how does a country like South Africa strike that balance, therefore, where you are pushing renewable energy, but at the same time preserving jobs for workers?
Exactly. That's where we come in as a responsible trade union movement whose primary responsibility is to protect the jobs of its members and to make sure that South Africa develop and to the same scale as the rest of the developed world, be it in America or in Australia, New Zealand, or Europe. We want the same level of development. So that's why we have been calling for a just transition. That puts workers at the center of a movement, away responsibly so to embracing a renewables, not irresponsible, not in the manner that doesn't take into consideration that there are thousands and thousands of workers whose lives entirely depends on the coal industry. We're calling for a just transition, and that's the first point. Secondly, we've been calling for a public, democratic, and worker-controlled renewable energy systems, not privatized schemes that simply replace one set of profiteers with another. We have been absolutely categorical in condemning the government's secret deals with the independent power producers, as well as the whole ideology of public-private sector partnerships that seeks to give guarantees to private sector that they will have guaranteed profits for years and years to come, that seeks to shift the risk of investing and investment away from the private sector, which believes in the ideology of private investment as a solution to all crises facing humankind. But suddenly the risks are now being taken by the South African government, as we're seeing not only in how Eskom is being forced to subsidize the independent power producers, but exactly the same thing is now being rolled out in the infrastructure development, including in the recently announced programs of government in Transnet, and as they fix the roads and they fix the harbors. That's the second issue we have been raising. Thirdly, we insist on the universal access to energy so that every household has affordable, reliable power as a basic right.
Yeah.
And we argue that that right has been slowly attacked and taken away since ESCOM faced the crisis in 2007, which have led to us paying more than 500% increase on tariffs or electricity tariffs on ESCOM. This is totally unsustainable. It is taking us back to the Stone Age. And lastly, we've been calling for international solidarity that workers all over the world must fight against climate denialism, but must insist on just transition that does not put workers' jobs at risk, but at the same time, that does not lead to the privatization of energy.
Well, Mr. Vavi, you've said a mouthful indeed. And what is important to keep in mind as well, though, is that while President Trump may be talking down climate change, he also has pulled out of the Paris Agreement. Now, what that means, or the implications of that for a country like South Africa, are the commitments that have been made by developed economies such as the United States to say, we will back the developing countries with financing or funding of this just energy transition. So that is going to be a very complicated matter going forward. I just want us to talk for a moment, Mr. Vavi, before I let you go, about the Madlanga inquiry that is ongoing. Your views always are interesting on these matters. And we're talking the economy here, and when it doesn't perform well, workers' jobs are usually at risk. Now we are looking at a commission that's probing whether or not the criminal justice system has been infiltrated by organized crime syndicates. Investor sentiment at a time like this in South Africa, where do you think that is going to put us, keeping in mind the discussion we have just had?
Well, may we just say we need international solidarity precisely to ensure that Donald Trump, the American, the North, Europe, do not doublespeak. Do not on one end of their mouth talk about the need to embrace renewables and move away from the carbon-dominated economies, and whilst at the same time they do exactly the opposite. After all, the biggest polluters in the world is the United States of America and Europe. It is they who must be embracing, more than even South Africa and the rest of the South, the need to move rapidly towards renewables in order to save the world from the calamities that we have been speaking about in this interview. We want to condemn that, including Germany, for example. Germany has, when it is facing the reality of the impact of their own sanctions against Russia and other countries, it went back basically to the commitments that it has been making, and it is now reopening its own coal mines to respond. But they won't allow the South African government to do so. Instead, they are giving money to the World Bank to give loans to South Africa so that South Africa alone can rapidly move to the renewables. And hence, in response to that pressure, government have been forced at some time to close some power stations faster than you will require to save jobs and to move in a responsible way to the renewables. Yeah. So we must make that very clear. We can only stop that if the workers of the world unite against hypocrisy, against doublespeak, and we must condemn the unilateralism of the United States to move out of the Paris Agreement, because it's not only that they are doing, they recently, and they are allowing Israel to flatten the whole country using their own weapons. And recently, They have allowed the Israel government to wage a war outside the permissions to be given by the United Nations Security Council. And they have been doing that, by the way, all over the world. They want to act unilaterally. They want to move out of the WTO. They're even threatening to reconsider their position in the ILO. In this recent ILO conference, they left out their unions and they went there only with the employers. That's the attitude of that right wing, which wants to act unilaterally to impose itself as the policeman of the world. The pity now is that there's no Nelson Mandela to call them out, and most of the leaders in the world are code-knowing and are simply submitting to that pressure of that oligarch that is now in charge of such an important economy to impose the imperialist agenda. So that's the first point. In relation to the Madlanga Commission, we have called for it when General Mkhwanazi addressed the nation on the 6th of July. We have condemned Parliament inaction, that you would have gone there and to spill the beans and only for them to look on the other side. And that now, very opportunistically, typical of them, very cynically, they are jumping into the bandwagon because they have seen how outraged the South African society is at the fact that General Mkhwanazi is telling us some things that some of us would have heard in the grapevines, and we didn't have evidence to put them as categorical as he has put them into the public space. We welcome that there is a commission, and that commission, in our view, opens just a very small window about why South Africa finds itself where it is today with a dysfunctional criminal justice system. Me and you now know from the people who are monitoring the levels of criminality in our society that South Africa's ability to convict murderers is now down to only 14.5%, and that we have lost 50% capacity to detect murder between year 2000 and 2022.
Yeah.
Now, that's a total disaster. And perhaps the reason why that is so may be, and we want the commission to finalize its work and make its recommendation, it may be that some of the important personalities that we should be relying upon are being captured by the criminal underworld.
Mr. Vavi, thank you very much for your time. As always, very refreshing to hear your views.